believe I could ever get tired of looking at these honey-colored cottages, rambling gardens that are counterposed with immaculately manicured topiaries, cobblestone streets, fun pubs, friendly people, usually with a dog hanging around, and stunning, spectacular views. It is just a magical walking holiday. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. On this program, I try to curate some of the greatest multi-day adventures from around the world where you've got to move. You've got to hike, bike, paddle, horseback ride, or somehow or another convey your body one place to the next. My goal is not only to find and share these trips with you, but also encourage you to go and give you the tools that you need so that you'll feel the joy and the empowerment that you get from actually doing something really exciting on your holidays. So let's get started. Today I'm finishing up my series on the Cotswold Way. The Cotswold Way is about a 100-mile trail that runs through some of England's most of scenic and spectacular beauty. In fact, England designates the whole Cotswold area as an area of outstanding natural beauty, and this is an honor it richly deserves. In part one of the Cotswold Way, I start the hike from Chipping Campden and work my way down to King Stanley. And if you haven't listened to that episode, I encourage you to do so. And today we're going to head south and work our way down to the finishing point of historic Bath. Most people traditionally do the Cotswold Way in a southbound manner from Chipping Campden to Bath, the way that I did it. They say to keep the wind at your back. I only had one really windy day, and it was really windy. I think it was whirling around so much, I don't think it made a difference which direction I was going in. At the end of part one, I was just waking up in King Stanley, where I hear the cows outside my window. I don't see them, but they must be nearby, even though I'm in a town, and I could see the main church right across the street. And like most villages, this is down in the valley, so I start the day with a brisk walk uphill. That gets your heart racing. At the top of the hill, I'm amused when I see a memorial tree with the epitaph plaque saying, "It's definitely someone else's problem now." I might have to steal that line. I come across another amusing sign. This one says, "Sheep racing." That I'd like to see. It's interesting, too, today that I'm starting to see some rock outcrops that you can see the Cotswold stone. You see the stone everywhere in the cottages. It's this honey-colored, very warm, rich stone. And I also noticing, too, the further south I get, the whiter the stone is getting. So it's losing a little bit of that tannish color. But today in the trail, I'm starting to see rock outcrops for the first time. Very cool. One thing I love about this trail is the constant contrast. Sometimes you're in the woodlands. Sometimes you're out on a ridge cap overlooking just gorgeous rolling hills filled with pastures and the hedgerows that are kind of like a whimsical, magical, kind of like a bunch of parallelograms forming to make a crazy quilt. If they were all perfectly straight, it would not be as cute. There's something about the irregular patterns of the hedgerows just adds to the charm. And when you're on top of the hill, you can see for miles. And it's just this rolling, gorgeous farmland, pasture land, and the occasional woodland. And of course, most of those pastures are filled with the Cotswold lion, otherwise known as their sheep. They get the lion name because their fur grows in this round, almost like dreadlocks coming off their face. It's kind of cute. You can see a picture at the website, activetravelaadventures.com/Cotswolds. I'm hiking near the end of summer, a great time to hike, but I've just missed the wildflowers in their final display for the year. However, on occasion, I do see the errant bluebell and thistles. Some of the other common plants that you'll see are some wild orchids, honesty plant, field poppies, dog violet and dog rose, speedwell, and foxglove, and lots of butterflies. I may have missed the wildflower season, but I'm just in time for the blackberries, which are growing rampantly wild throughout the hedgerows, so you can grab a snack whenever you'd like. A little while later, I turn a corner and I see a farmer working the fields with his tractor, and then in the distance I see two little red dots, and I was like, well, it's out in a pasture field. They can't be some telephone booths. And then I see that the little red dots are moving. I was like, that's where I'm going. And so I went up this really nice but fairly steep little hill to get up to the top and once again get that view. It's always worth it. Even though every day walk in the Cotswolds has been a treat, today I have a special treat in store. I'm going to have lunch at the home of my friend Simon's parents, who live in Dursley, which the Cotswold Way happens to go right through. I'll only have to make about a half a mile detour, and I will go have a nice home-cooked meal, which will be nice. Regular listeners will remember Simon. He's the friend that I made when I was walking the West Highland Way in Scotland last year. The West Highland Way is episode number 3, and you'll also meet Simon too in part 1 of the Cotswold, because Simon and his girlfriend Helen hosted me the first couple of nights before I started my hike, and we went to dinner midway. I think it's so cool how quickly you can bond when you're out on an adventure like this. As I start to enter the town of Dursley, the path takes us through a private vineyard, and the grapes are ready for harvest. It was so cool to see them all lined up, and unlike the blackberries that were growing wild, these were cultivated, and I was on private property, even though the path goes through it, so I behaved myself and didn't partake of any. Based on the distance and the pace I'd been walking, I had estimated that I would be about 1 o'clock before I would get to Simon's parents' house, but I had made really good time today, so I messengered Simon to let his parents know that I would be arriving early. When I knocked on the door, a woman answers, and she looks really shocked to see me, and I forgot to tell Simon he maybe should have warned them I'm going to look a little ratty and disheveled with a big backpack. But once she realized who I was, a big smile, and I was welcomed inside. We sat in the living room and visited for a while, just asking each other questions and trying to learn about each other's lives. I can see where Simon gets his charm. His parents are delightful. After visiting for an hour or so, then I was treated to a wonderful grilled meal. When you're traveling, a home-cooked meal sure hits the spot. Since I had access to Wi-Fi at the house, I asked if I could use it and check my messages before I headed out. Sometimes when you're in these little villages, Wi-Fi access can be dicey, so you grab it while you can. And I'm looking at it, I was like, oh dear, I forgot, today's my birthday. My friends and family back home had sent me emails and texts wishing me a happy birthday. I must say that even though I like traveling solo, it was comforting to have some company on my birthday. I was having a really good time, but the minutes and the hours are slipping away, and I still had 7 more miles to hike. I was to hike 14 miles today, and I consider my feet 13-mile feet, which means that by 13 miles, my feet are screaming. I prefer, if I can, to do like 10 to 12, somewhere in there, then I feel like I've had a really good hike, but I'm not dying. It's a good thing I'm not a purist saying I've got to hit every single mile on some of these treks, because the trail happens to cross a road, and the road is uphill. And so when Simon's parents offered to take me up that hill, I readily said yes. It was a super steep climb, so I was glad for the lift. And once you got to the top, I know I keep saying spectacular, spectacular. This view was spectacular, all capital letters. What a gorgeous, gorgeous view. And it was kind of flat up top. So in fact, they were going to take a walk after I went on my merry way. Up on top of the Stinchcombe Hill, you can take a shortcut, but I recommend that you do that extra 3 miles where you walk all along the whole ridge. Now, I got to drive, so it depends on your feet, but the prettiest part is at the end. So if you take the shortcut, you're missing all that capital letter spectacular. It's still pretty, of course, just not as pretty as if you make it to this one particular viewpoint. Definitely one of the highlights. While I was up there, I was thinking again about Christine, the woman that I met that was doing it at a more leisurely pace. And I wish in hindsight I had truly had done it the way Christine was doing it. Because today it would have been nice to spend the rest of the day in Dursley and enjoy the company of Simon's parents. Or if I didn't have that, to go up and just spend the afternoon up on Stinchcombe Hill. It was just so pretty. Truly, it was one of the highlights of the whole trip. But time's going, and I got to make it to Wootton Under Edge, and I still had a long way to go, even though I had the shortcut from by taking that little drive up there. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you can spare the time, slow down your hike so you really get to stop and savor the moments when you come across your Stinchcombe Hill, whatever that may be, that you say, oh, I want to spend more time here. And that Dursley was a cute town. I would like to have spent the afternoon just exploring it. heading back down the hill. You go through the forest, and then the next thing I know, I'm walking through some, I think it was mustard greens. So a farm raising some type of a cool weather crop. I just think it's so funny how you're just allowed to walk through people's land. It's just so different from anything I'm used to around here. Another thing that caught my fancy was I came across one of those iconic red phone booths, which, since people don't use landlines anymore, have been converted, as I've been seeing them. Sometimes it's a lending library. Sometimes it'll just have notes in there of things to do in the town. But I found one that still had the phone that apparently must still be in use. A little further up is another great viewpoint at the Tyndale Monument. The Tyndale Monument is a tower that's built in honor of William Tyndale. He translated the New Testament, and he was born nearby. It was constructed in 1866 and is over 100 feet tall, but it is possible that you can climb up to the top. It's a spiral staircase of 121 steps. Since I still had many miles to go, I just took advantage of the view from the ground. Since much of the trail is along pasture land, it was kind of odd when I see coming up ahead a big cluster of pine trees. And I was like, what is that? It was so out of place. It looked like it was there on purpose. And sure enough, it was. As I get a little closer, I see that the pine trees are all enclosed in a fenced area. And it turns out that these were planted in 1815 to commemorate the Battle of Waterloo and the end of the Napoleonic Wars. And it just, you read about the Battle of Waterloo in your history books and all that, but you sometimes forget that this is a real event, something that happened to real people and affected the people in this area tremendously. And I just love when your holidays can also bring history to life for you as well. And there's a ton of historical things. In addition to 500-year-old cottages and villages, you'll see tons of hill forts, these barrows or these burial grounds from Stone Ages. You see remnants of the Roman Empire. It's just a fascinating walk through history along your walking holiday. After walking around the pine tree enclosure, I start heading down the hill to Wootton Under Edge, my destination for the day. When I get down to Civilization, it doesn't take me long to realize that I like this town, and I like the vibe of it. When I finally make it to my guest house, which was more like an Airbnb, I would say, rather than a guest house because they only had one guest room. What a view. What a house. If I had known I was going to be staying there, I had to stay 2 nights. And then when I went downtown later that evening for dinner, I was like, ooh, this should have been a good day for a rest day because it was my kind of town. It wasn't hoity-toity. It was just a real everyday person's town that was cute. Like I said before, I don't mind traveling solo. In fact, I kind of like it. However, the time that I really like to talk to people is at the end of the day, like 5, 6 o'clock, cocktail hour kind of a thing. And so generally speaking, I will go to a restaurant, and if they have a bar area, I'll sit up there so I can have some conversation. But one thing I know is culturally different, and I had to ask Simon about it. I said, Simon, it was obvious I was an out-of-towner in this one place I went to, and everybody knew each other and all that, and I looked like I was out of place. You'd think someone would say, hey, what are you doing here, blah, blah, blah. But, they were friendly enough, but did not engage in any kind of conversation. And Simon says, well, they would think that would be weird for them to do that because they don't know you. And so then I got a little cagey, and I started, when I would go up and I'd order a drink or a menu, I would make sure that the bartender would know that, I'm hiking the Cotswold Way as an opening that people might start a conversation. And that did seem to work. Depending on how close I was to villages would determine whether or not I had conversation with people along the path or was I pretty much in solitude. I like them both, but like I said, at the end of the day, I like to talk to somebody. The next morning when I was walking through the town, I passed a restaurant called The Falcon. It's a local steakhouse that they use the locally grown beef. And if you want to eat there, you need to make reservations 6 weeks in advance. So I wanted to give you a heads up on that if you want to have a really nice, fine meal out. I find it funny that I tend to get more lost when I'm in town than I do when I'm out in the countryside. And that's because there's signs and posts all over the place. And so it's easy to miss your marking of where you're supposed to turn. And I did that, of course, in Wootton Under Edge and probably spent an extra 20 minutes or so wandering around until I finally found the trail again. I think sometimes they put signs in unexpected places, sometimes on the right side, sometimes on the left side, sometimes it's on a post, sometimes it's on a little marker. So you just got to keep your eyes peeled. You're never going to get too lost. I think trips like this too also help make you more mindful because you do have to pay attention to what you're doing. Of course, in England, there's lots of really nice old churches, but there's a particularly nice one in Wootton Under Edge that you see as you're heading towards the outskirts of town. And then you also cross a brook, and that made me think, I've hardly seen any water. So it reminds me that you need to bring your water every day, because I can only think of, when I was looking back, of only one or two places that I could have gotten some water that I treated. And again, with all the pastures and all that, it's going to have Giardia, so you definitely want to treat it because there's too many livestock in the area. And so just pack what water you need for the day or until you get to the next village. I stopped and listened to that babbling brook for about 5 minutes, and it was nice. It helped reset my brain and to get my body and my mind in the right mindset for about another 12.5-mile hike. Today was going to be my last long day. All the rest, the next couple days, were going to be pretty easy. A little later in the morning, I have to walk alongside a quiet country road, and I see a sign that says, "Drive slow, frogs and toads in road." And I got to tell you, people always ask me, "Are you scared to be doing this by yourself?" And I'd say the only thing that ever makes me nervous sometimes is the roads. And there's something else I've noticed that I think is a cultural difference. In the U.S. where I live, if there's an obstacle in the road, we don't think twice about crossing the center line to go around the obstacle. But it seems to me that the Brits stay in the lines. And so if I was there and there's nobody coming the other way, they would still stay in the line and be right next to me on the road versus crossing over into the opposite lane to give me more space. And so it's a little unnerving for me. So I prefer not being on the roads as much as possible. And you are very little on the road on the Cotswold Way. And here's a news site. All of a sudden, I'm walking through this ravine that I feel like I'm in Jurassic Park. I haven't seen any landscape like this at all. And I'm not quite sure why this is so different. I'm guessing that perhaps it is a dry creek bed that if they have a heavy rain, that this becomes waterlogged. But it was kind of a cool change of pace, and it was just heightened the senses a little bit. I emerge again into a field and see still the remnants of the wildflowers. Although this time now I'm starting to see a bunch of rogue buddleias or butterfly bushes. And that's kind of cool. Some of them are quite large. And speaking of flowers, not only do the homes usually have names, they also usually have gardens, both for flowers and for food. I saw one interesting bird deterrent to keep the birds pecking at the fruit in an orchard. On a pole, they had a spinning, almost like a kite of a hawk. So as the wind would make the hawk dance in the air, presumably that would keep the birds away from pecking at the apples or munching on the berries. Speaking of birds, when I was in Alaska, the first time I saw a bald eagle, I was like, oh my gosh, a bald eagle. Then you still get excited every time you see one for a while. And then after a while, it becomes, oh, another bald eagle. The same kind of thing happened to me with pheasants. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I would get excited every time I saw one. But after a while, there are lots of pheasants. And I came to find out from some locals I was talking to one evening that they actually stocked the fields with the pheasants. And it actually costs about 50 pounds to shoot one. So they're quite expensive. And one of the pastures that you go through is Sir Dyson of the Dyson Vac fame, has got this monumental spread, this huge estate, and it's loaded with pheasants as well. Even though the path goes right through his property, he has made a point of landscaping it, so it's really hard to see most of the house. You see little snippets here and there, but you can tell you're on it because everything is all first-class fencing, for everything, all signage is first class. It's quite lovely. The guys who told me about the Dyson estate also told me that Dyson is the largest landowner in the UK. They believe because of inheritance reasons. Apparently you can inherit land without paying taxes, but if you're in other financial vehicles, you do have to pay estate taxes on that. And Dyson says he's trying to grab as much land as possible just to preserve the land. So regardless, it's a lovely estate to walk through. A little while further, I'm again walking in a ravine, but it's a ravine down below a pasture. And so I am about, I'd say 5, 6, 7 feet below the pasture above me for some reason. And there's cows right there. It's like, that'll make a really cute picture. So I'm getting ready to frame the shot. I realize I'm staring at the face of not one, but 2 bulls. I was like, whoa. But I just cautiously kept on walking along after that. Didn't take the picture. I didn't want to alarm them in any way. I don't know if the bull seemed to have no interest in me whatsoever, but I didn't want to take a chance. By now, I've been walking for about 3 hours, and I decided it's a good time to take a water and a little snack break. So I find a shady little tree, and I sit beneath it and have a Snickers bar and just kind of rest my feet for a little bit. And then I decide, I think I'll take a little pee break too. And literally, in 3 hours, I've not seen one Cotswold Way hiker along the path at all. And sure enough, that's when somebody comes, without fail. Usually I can wait until I get to a village to use the restroom, but on occasions you do have to go in the wild. And so I always carry a little bit of toilet paper and also a plastic baggie to put my trash in. Please pack out your TP, folks. The guy that I meet is from Oregon, and he's just doing a few days of the hike, which is, remember, you don't have to do the whole hike. You can just do sections of it, just like this guy did. He mentions to me that he had just passed some women from Boston who I will come to meet a little bit later in the day, and they had also hiked Hadrian's Wall, which is another of the items that are on my top 10 UK hikes. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, and that is episode 13 if you would like to get the complete list. In Hawkesbury, I come to a beautiful monument to honor General Robert Somerset. I didn't know who the man was, so I did some research on Wikipedia, and he was a noted soldier, and one interesting story about him is during the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, he lost his hat during the first cavalry charge, and then when he was subsequently trying to look for it, I guess as he bends over, a cannonball tears off the flap of his coat and kills his horse. Strange. Anyhow, it's quite a pretty monument. And from there, as I'm entering the town, I take a detour from the path, and I ask a local for a lunch recommendation, and they send me to the Beaufort Arms. It's a gorgeous day, and I only have a few more hours to go, so I decide to splurge on a pint and prawns. As I go to wash up, I see that there's a really nice picnic area outside. So when I come back, I tell my waiter, hey, I'm moving outside. And as I was sitting out there, I've got this book on the Cotswold Way by Trailblazer, which I'd recommend you picking up before you do this trek. It's got all sorts of nice hand-drawn maps there. And I see that the Beaufort Arms is on there, and behind me is the cricket field. And I see that too. And I said, ooh, I don't have to go back to where I detoured from the path. I could just cut across that cricket field and work my way over to the path. And that's exactly what I did. So I cut through the cricket field, and then I cut through a farm, and then I catch back up with the Cotswold Way Trail. It made me think of my friends Jerry and Jane, who were through hiking the Appalachian Trail, and they had a rule that if something notable to see was a quarter mile or more off the trail, they wouldn't go look at it. And I was like, geez, you're never going to be that way again. I can't believe you wouldn't do that. And now I get that. When you're walking along all day long, day after day, those quarter miles make a difference. So it's really got to be something special for you to do that extra mileage. Which brings me back to Christine again. If I were doing less miles each day, I'd be climbing those towers and doing those detours. Something to think about. I continue my hike across multiple pastures and open fields, and I just keep pinching myself. I can't believe that the views are so striking, and it just doesn't get old. You just can't stop just absorbing all this beauty. In a little while, I see a foursome ahead, and I catch up, and it's the Canadians I met a couple nights ago. So we hiked together for a little bit, and then they stopped to take a water and a view break, and I continued on. Next, I come out to another old fort. One of the favorite things about it is a folly. I believe I mentioned follies in the first part, but just in case I didn't or you did not hear it, a folly is usually tall towers or structures that were built just to show off one's wealth. And this particular folly at this fort was built literally for the birds, because so much of the nesting cavities and barns and all that have been torn down. This folly is built as a shelter for barn owls and swallows and such that use structures in order to build their homes. And it's quite pretty. I'll put a picture on the website. This particular folly was built in 2000 as a millennial project. In a bit, I come to the town of Little Sodbury, and I like that I'm coming to towns that are starting to have Sodbury in the name, because that means I'm nearing where I can take my boots off, because tonight's rest is in Old Sodbury. No matter how much I'm enjoying the hike, at the end of the day, I'm ready to rest, and I am certainly ready to get my feet out of the boots. In Little Sodbury, I see where lots of locals pick up a little extra money by selling some of their excess, whether it's fresh eggs or produce or fruit from the orchards or whatnot. And usually there's a little honor system box out there. I saw one in particular that perhaps they'd been taken advantage of a few times too many. The produce was out front, but you inserted your money into this tube, and the tube went on the back side of a locked gate into, I assume, a box on the other end. So even if you took the tube out, I assume that it did not come with the box. Kind of clever. From the town, I head back into the woods, and then all of a sudden my feet are finding comfort walking on the soft ground. And then all of a sudden there's a change in the texture. And I look down, and guess what I see? Chestnuts. I haven't seen chestnuts in forever. The town I grew up in, Long Island, we had the chestnut trees, but they were all killed during the blight. I was so happy to see that England's chestnut trees did not seem to be affected by the blight that virtually wiped out all the chestnut trees where I grew up. Next up, Woodcock Farm, another old hill fort with, guess what, spectacular views. So you drink in one last big view before you head downhill to Old Sodbury. It's here that I see the first black sheep. Just about all the other ones have been that tanny kind of off-white linen color. And then I start seeing some ones with different kinds of faces, more black around the faces, and then a true Baba black sheep. And at last, I make it to Old Sodbury. After I walk past this massive sycamore tree, I cross through St. John the Baptist Church, which was built around 1200 AD. I'm grateful to see my inn, the Dog Inn, which was built in 1590. Remember how I said in the last episode how much I was enjoying the tubs and soaking at the end of the day? Alas, the last 3 nights, my rooms have had just a shower, so I'm looking forward to once again being able to soak my toes and soak my feet and just soak my tired muscles. But that won't happen tonight. As I relax in the courtyard, I look at the walls and I wonder what sights and people and events these walls must have witnessed over the last few centuries. I run into the Canadian couples and join them for dinner, and then after dinner, I crashed. In the morning, it's off to Cold Ashton. I've only got 8.5 miles to go today, and I notice that the hills are starting to flatten out again. However, I still have one more pretty decent hill to climb up, and that's Doddington Park, home of the famous Sir James Dyson, whom I mentioned earlier in the program. I'm now about to climb the hill that passes through his estate. There's a fascinating interview on one of my favorite podcasts called How I Built This with Guy Raz, and it was in February of 2018 that he interviews Sir Dyson, and I think it's a lot of fun. So if you're interested in the story at all, check it out. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, and the show notes you can find just if you're listening to this on your phone, just by scrolling down, and you'll find it there, and there should be active links on there. And also you can go to activetraveladventures.com/Cotswolds, or just go to the directory page and find it that way if you can't remember the name. And I'll have links there as well. Remember, the corresponding web pages for each episode include tons of photos, often videos, and a lot more information that's more detailed than I can give you in the podcast. And if you are a subscriber to my monthly newsletter, you will also get the free travel planners automatically each month. So anyway, I try to help you out from give you the big picture on the podcast, a little bit more detail on the website, and the nitty-gritty how to plan it on the travel planners. So after a lovely morning strolling the fields, all of a sudden I'm getting to what's going to be my least favorite part of the trail. I'm starting to hear traffic. I'm starting to get back towards civilization. I'm nearing the end of my journey. I see my first major highway that I've seen in, maybe a week? At least one that's up close and personal, and I can hear the noise of the trucks, etc., as I'm starting to get close. Then I also enter a new kind of a field. Away from the highways, I'm now going through a hayfield. This is the first time going through one of those. The hay's been cut, but it hasn't yet been baled. But still, the path goes right smack through it. This never fails to crack me up. Yes, I know, I'm easily entertained. Afterwards, a farmer with conservation in mind has left a big strip of land, possibly about 2 acres that I could see, allowed just to go fallow, and therefore all the wildflowers to attract all the bees, the butterflies, and the birds, and that was just a riot of activity, and I had a lot of fun going through that. I'm sure a month ago it would have been absolutely spectacular. Now all those flowers are going to seed, and so the seed heads are kind of dancing in the breeze. It was still kind of cool to see. One thing I don't think I've mentioned so far is throughout the hike, whenever I would get to one of the signposts for the Cotswold Way, often somebody stuck a dove feather in the marker, sticking out of the wood somewhere in a little crack in the post. So throughout the hike, I've been curious, is this a person that's just ahead of me, maybe by an hour, a day, maybe even a week? Or is this an ongoing habit of people that do it and I just didn't know about it? In any case, when I came across a dove feather, I stuck it in the post too. So perhaps it's many of us. I noticed the doves here are really fat and happy. They seem to be about twice the size of the doves I have here at home. And even if you can't see them, you're often going to hear them cooing in the background, kind of accompanying you as you walk along the trail. I also hear a lot of songbirds, much more than I hear at home. I don't often see them, but I sure can hear them. At St. Mary Magdalene, there's a beautiful graveyard that surrounds the church. Some graves filled with loved ones buried a couple of 100 years ago, and many from the Great War. I also come across somebody building a brand new dry stone wall. Along the Cotswold, you're going to see lots of dry stacked stone walls, and to see the one being built new, and actually they even had a sign showing you how the thing is made, so it's nice to see there's still tradespeople out there that know how to build in the traditional ways. I understood from one of the farmers that because of the sheep, it was easier to contain them with the stone walls. It was less snaggy on their fur, I believe he said, versus some of the barbed wire fences and things that we would use here in the States. These walls are about 24 inches across the base, and then they taper up to about 16 inches at the top. And with the weather, require constant maintenance. And you'll never guess what comes up next. You got it, a spectacular view. Now we're at Badminton Plantation. I saw no signs of anything resembling badminton, but it sure was a pretty view. Then I come to one of the rare campgrounds. I think on the whole trail I saw 2 designated campgrounds. I guess you could stealth camp, but it really is kind of difficult. This isn't really a camping trip. You need to plan to go village to village. I wouldn't recommend backpacking it. Up ahead is a windmill, turning quietly in the gentle breeze. I've been stalking this windmill for days. I first saw it when I was up on that Napoleon Hill with the pine trees. I could see it a long, long way away. I can't believe I'm finally by the windmill. Something interesting about the plants I've noticed are the plants that the livestock are ignoring are prickly. Things like stinging nettles and other little things that have little spines in them. So I'm guessing because of the spines, the sheep and the cows choose not to eat them. So they're allowed to mature and give forth their seed, unlike the grasses that are in the pastures that the animals are eating. And this is a reminder, too, to remember to pay attention to where you squat. The little prickly plants are mainly around the borders of the pasture and not in the main pasture lands itself. And I don't remember seeing any in the woodland. It's mainly around the pastures. Eventually I hit civilization again, and up ahead is one of these cute mail carrier cars. Now, who would think mail carrier cars are cute? These are red, and they look old-fashioned. It says Royal Mail on the side. And so I stopped to take a picture, and the mailman came out, and I said, I'm just taking a picture. They're so cute. I like the Royal Mail. He said, would you like to sit in and drive? I said, sure. So I've got a picture of me. I'll put it on the website, driving, quote-unquote, the Royal Mail Carrier. I asked my new mailman friend where I should go for lunch, and he looks puzzled. And finally says, there's a cafe over in the National Trust. And I'm right at the border of the National Trust. And the National Trust is, or I should say are, places of historical interest or natural beauty that the country has designated as kind of like a preserve to keep the quality and to open it up to the public so that everybody gets to enjoy it. I'm coming up to a very formal estate that's been restored. It has over 3 miles just of stone walls just inside this estate. I was pleasantly surprised with the nice healthy options that they offered in this cafe, so I grabbed a nice meal and sat outside in the courtyard, where I thoroughly enjoyed my chicken with mango chutney sandwich and a non-alcoholic sparkling wild elderberry bubbly, which was kind of a nice treat. I had come in through an unmarked back gate that the postman had sent me through, and I saw some signs that the entrance was £13, but I didn't see a ticket gate anywhere, so I'm guessing if you want to go inside the old home, that's where you pay the entrance fee, because when I went outside the back gate that I came in and then walked past the front gate, I still didn't see a ticket booth, so it must be inside the house. It looked like to me that the public could enjoy the gardens and the grounds for free. I had picked up a vicious cold, so I decided rather than finding out that I should head to my inn and try to take a nap and get as rested as I could for tomorrow. During my walk, I'm out during the cusp of the change of the seasons from summer into fall, and I see a big difference in just the week that I've been out here. The first few days, in fact, the first week, I see no signs of farmer activity, but now in the last 2 days, I'm starting to see the farmers are starting to till, and they're starting to plow, and they're starting to harvest. Some of the green is now turning brown with the newly exposed soil. The crazy patchwork quilt of hedgerows that I've been seeing for the last week is now turning into a contrast of green and brown. And frankly, it makes for a pleasant contrast. Before I know it, I'm in town. But that's not really what you'd call it. It's more like an intersection. I see the Shell station. I know that I'm nearby home. I had a company by the name of Miklador make all the arrangements for my trip. They planned where I was staying. They told me my itinerary. They gave me maps, books, everything I could possibly need to know so that I would be able to do this with confidence. And I think they did a fantastic job. I'll put a link to them in the show notes and also on the travel planner. And it was because of these notes, I knew that when I see the gas station, I'm home. All I did was tell Miklador how many days I wanted to hike, and they did all the rest. Super easy. In the custom brochure they gave me, it gives me my itinerary for the day, my accommodations with contact information, address, etc. It tells me if I have to do anything special for the evening meal. It has a picture of what the building looks like and who my contacts. And then here for today's, it says, follow the route of the Cotswold Way to Pennsylvania. That's the name of the town that I was staying in. When you reach Main A46 Road, look to the left and you will see the petrol station. Swan Cottage is just after the filling station and is clearly signposted. And then it has a map. I mean, you can't get any easier than that. Miklador also made arrangements to move my luggage each day, so all I had to do is have it down in the lobby or wherever they told me to by usually 8:30 or 9 in the morning, and by the time I made it to the night's accommodations, my bag was waiting for me. I'm glad I tried this company because I was super impressed. This is the second walking holiday that I've done, and I think that they did an exceptional job. I don't accept advertising at the Active Travel Adventures podcast or website, but one thing I do is try to build affiliate relationships with companies that I know, like, and trust, and I want to be confident in any company or product that I recommend to you. Miklador hit it out of the park, so while they are not an affiliate, I'm certainly going to approach them to see would they like to form that kind of a relationship. And when I build an affiliate relationship, I'll often either get discounted or sometimes free travel, sometimes I get a small commission. And so if ever you use any of the links on my website and it happens to be one of my affiliates, it does help support the program. So if you're going to be doing these things anyway, I'd appreciate if you show me a little bit of love and use my links. It lets them know that Active Travel Adventures did send you. It doesn't cost you a dime, but it sure does help defray some of my costs in putting together this program. I sure appreciate it. Thanks. So anyhow, I see the petrol station and I know hook a left at the station and I am home free for the night. So I'm going to go get cleaned up and then lie down and rest. I have just picked up one nasty cold and I'm going to try to nip it in the bud. After a nice hot shower, I lie down for a couple hours. I never did fall asleep, but it was nice just to rest. My inn is in the middle of nowhere, and so I talked to the owner, and I'm the only guest at the house that night. And so I have him make dinner for me. And we were just chatting and talking over a glass of wine. And he said that's the big hang up with his business is that there was no place that he could send his guests. So either he would have to drive them and then go pick them up, 10 miles each way, or he'd have to cook. And now as a widower, he's now the cook. And he actually made me quite a lovely meal. So after my nice hearty meal, I decided to turn in early to bed. I can't believe that this is my last night on the trail. I wonder if tomorrow I'm going to know when it's my last cow, my last lamb, or even my last hill. Simon has become a good friend. He's staying nearby at his daughter's dorm. He's going to leave the dorm before dawn and hike 6 miles to join me to do the last stretch into Bath with me. So I'm excited to catch up with Simon in the morning and also to have a partner to enter the city of Bath and hit the final plate at the end of the Cotswold Way. True to his word, Simon's there not at 9, but actually a little bit before. So at 9 o'clock, we head off for our last 10 miles of the Cotswold Way and enter the historic city of Bath. I walk at a pretty decent clip, but he really has me at a good pace. It doesn't take too long before in the distance we start to see the city of Bath. Bath is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is famous for its Roman-built baths. The trail itself ends at Bath Abbey. In front of the abbey at the square, inset into the square, is an engraved limestone medallion that indicates the terminal point of the Cotswold Way, or the beginning point if you're heading northbound. En route to Bath, you walk across the famous old battlefield of Lansdowne, where a notorious battle was waged in 1643. In fact, they have a sign up there about two friends that knew they'd be fighting each other probably to the death that day, but on opposing sides, both convinced of the righteousness of their side. In the distance, too, you'll see the Final Folly. And you know whoever built this huge structure to show off to the people of Bath. As soon as we hit the town, we find a little pub for a celebratory pint before wandering our way to find the famous medallion. En route to the Abbey, you also pass the Royal Crescent. And the Royal Crescent is this magnificent building with Georgian architecture. People actually live there. I can't even imagine what these places must cost. The Royal Crescent is about 500 feet long, and it has about 30 terraced houses built in this huge crescent shape overlooking Bath. The first floor features over 100 columns. It truly is quite striking. I'll put a picture on the website. I would recommend staying at least a couple of days in Bath and actually enjoying one of the baths. People have been taking baths here in these invigorating springs since before the Roman times, but the Romans really made it popular. I had a conference for a week before this trip, and I've been gone another 2 weeks on this trip, so I've actually been on the road for 3 weeks, and I have got to get back home. Unfortunately, that means that I did not get to truly explore the city of Bath. But on the bright side, that gives me an excuse to come back again because it looks like a superb city. Simon and I wandered around a little bit doing some exploring, stopping for a bite to eat, stopping for a pint, and just soaking in the sights as best we could in the afternoon that we had. When Simon and I finally made it to the medallion, it's almost a little bit anticlimactic because on a trip like this, it truly is the journey. I felt the same way when I ended my West Highland Way walk. You're just like, where's the band? Where's the parade with all the trumpets and balloons? And it's, you know you've done it, but you're surrounded by dozens, if not hundreds of people all going about their way. They don't even know the trail is there, most of them. In fact, when Simon was taking my quote-unquote victory photo of me kneeling down on the medallion, some people came to see, what is this medallion? Why is this crazy-looking person doing like a victory, not a dance, but a victory gesture on top of it? But it is quite fulfilling to know that you've hiked 100 miles. It's not something a lot of people can do. And this truly is a doable hike. I mean, even with my heel issues, even with the cold, all that, on any given day, I'd give it like a 2 out of 5 because it's not really that difficult. It's the fact that you're doing it day after day that I put it at a 3. But if you are at all in decent physical shape and you can hike for 6 or 7 hours a day or walk 6 or 7 hours a day, this is an eminently doable trip. And it's a super starter trip because if you're listening to this podcast, you understand English. They speak English, although sometimes their words are different than ones that we would use. You still can get along fine communication-wise. The food is similar to things that you're used to eating. All the signage everywhere is in your language. And the people are super friendly along the trail. And this would be a great get your feet wet into adventure travel. And even if you're a hardcore adventure traveler, just the beautiful scenery, the people, and the history are reason enough to give the Cotswold Way a try. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of the Cotswold Way and that it's inspired you to try your own walking holiday. A special shout out and aloha to Listen in Hawaii, who sent me a really nice email that she is planning to do the Cotswold Way next spring. Like I said, if that's not your thing, I did put together an episode earlier in the year on the UK's 10 best walking holidays. Again, I'll link to that in the show notes and on the website. And I encourage you to try any one of those as well. And there's, particularly in Europe, they have trails everywhere. So if England's not your bag, there's plenty of places. You want to go to Germany, you want to go to France, you want to go to Spain or Italy, Portugal. There's trails all over the place. And I'll be covering a lot of those in future episodes. If there's one that you would like to see me cover sooner rather than later, please send me an email at kit@activetraveladventures.com. I love getting your emails with feedback or suggestions all the time. It makes my day when I see an email come in from you. So I encourage you to write me and tell me about your trips and where you want to go and what other places you'd like me to cover. In the meantime, I will be back in 2 weeks with another great adventure. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. It's free. Until then, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.